So welcome everybody. I'm really excited about our conversation today. I've been thinking about this for a few months now, and we decided to do it. And now here we are finally doing it. So just to give you a little bit of context about how this came about, we study what people eat all over the world. We track new product launches. We do a lot of consumer research. And part of that is we also do a top 10 trends every year. And this year, trend number 10 is the age of the influencer. And we think that we're starting to see a slow shift to more science-based and reliable influencers. So to study this in more detail, we thought, why not just talk to some real influencers? So today we're joined by the Farm Babe, the Food Science Babe, and Dr. Rachel Cheatham. And we're going to have a conversation about influencers and what they see and what they experience. And hopefully help all of you to understand this whole world. It's never going away. Brands will start having more conversations with consumers directly, but also through influencers. So now we're going to have a conversation about that. So does anybody want to talk about their best influencer moment and their best or worst influencer moments?
I can talk about my interaction with Burger King last summer. Burger King had released an ad that was painting livestock farmers in a very negative light, and it had extreme backlash. It was called Cow's Menu, and the idea was that they were adding lemongrass to cattle diets to help them fart less. And it was this whole thing, but the problem with their research is that a lot of it wasn't yet published or it was inconclusive. They had some promising research, but the scientists fought back, the farmers fought back. I mean, the ad had like kids in gas masks, and the scientists were sitting here going, 97% of methane comes from cow mouths, not their rear. So there was just a ton of misinformation all around, and it really upset a lot of us in the agriculture space. So they had a ton of backlash, and I ended up sending a tweet to Burger King's chief marketing officer. And Burger King actually reached out to me, and we had a call, and I invited them out to the farm. And this was when I was on the farm in Iowa raising cattle commercially. And I said, look, if you want to talk about sustainability, this is the forefront of livestock farmers' minds every day, or just farmers in general. It's something we care about. I said, if you want to talk about what we're doing to help the planet, like, come on out, like, I'll show you. And they took me up on it. And so Burger King execs came out. I put together a team of experts like livestock nutritionists. We went to a dairy farm that had methane digesters. They got to hear from experts in cattle. It was really amazing. And they brought a camera crew out and did a new ad. And so the new ad painted farmers in a positive light. They said in hindsight, they wish they would have done things differently. They want to include farmers in the conversation moving forward. And since then, they've done more pro-farmer marketing ads. And so that for me it was also a really important time because it was COVID. And so here, we're all feeling like depressed, like we can't be around other people. Like my career as a public speaker was so slow because of COVID. And so to have that happen in the middle of it was like refreshing, to know that a corporation can listen and they can change their mind and they can change their tune. And it's like, we do care. And as farmers, a lot of times we feel we don't get a voice in the food marketing space. We feel underappreciated, undervalued, forgotten. Farmers are real people, and they're people behind everything that touches our lives all day, every day. And so that was definitely my best influencer moment, to realize that something as small as a tweet can influence a brand as globally, just large scale as Burger King, so I was really, really pleased with the fact that they listened to us as farmers.
That's fantastic. Anybody else have a story to share, best or worst moment?
Mine isn't, I guess, just like one thing, but just, I guess, on a day-to-day basis, just getting messages from people that, maybe had some disordered relationships with food, or just, thinking they had to buy organic for their family, or they were poisoning, their kids. Just the messages that I get from moms or, whoever else, just saying like, thank you so much for letting me know that I don't need to be afraid of my food, or, that I need to be avoiding these specific ingredients, even, there are, people with eating disorders that are like, you've helped me in my recovery, just understanding that I don't need to have a big list of foods that I need to avoid. And that I think just like day to day getting those messages, because, you know, what me and Michelle are doing online, we get a lot of pushback. And so sometimes, you know, I mean, every day I have probably a moment where I'm like, is this worth it? Like, what's the point of this? So I think just getting those messages regularly really helps me to keep, you know, realizing like, yes, my goal, you know, that was my goal when I started these pages. And so as long as people are feeling that way and sending me those messages, like it helps me to keep going, because that was my entire goal when I started my pages, was to give people, you know, factual information that I wish I would have had 10 or 15 years ago, when I was afraid of specific food items based on marketing or media or whatever it was. So I think that just helps to, you know, keep me motivated to keep doing it. So.
Well, Rachel, I'm going to ask you maybe an expert question, kind of based off of what Erin just said. So there's a lot of food marketing that promotes a lot of claims, and then there's confusion. But at the same time, if you're trying to meet the needs of consumers who, you know, are asking for these things, do you have any thoughts about that? Like, maybe I'm kind of putting you on the spot, but what should the industry do to respond? Do we just respond to what consumers want, or how do you ever educate the public in a big enough way? Because that's difficult and expensive.
Yeah.
But do you have any thoughts on that and the role of people like you?
Yes, it's a great question. I don't have the answer. Surprise, surprise, but I do have thoughts. And I think I would just start with my primary observation, which is it is all very, not all, but the vibe I get in so many conversations is one of confrontation and divisiveness. And whether that is, you know, pro-dairy, anti-dairy, pro-meat, anti-meat, I don't know about pro-diet, but like diet protocol culture versus anti-diet. There's a segment now that I'm seeing in the dietetics world that is like anti-diet. And Erin's nodding. And I'm just like, how, like, I have a PhD in this, and I'm still sometimes going, okay, wait, like, hold up. And I find myself increasingly, and then I'm going to get to your question more, I find myself increasingly like wanting to just quiet the noise and not feel like it's these guys versus those guys, or, you know, these women versus those women, these people versus those people. I will find myself being like, you know what, I'm going to go look it up myself. I'm going to go on PubMed and I'm going to start pulling research and I'm going to find out what's up. And even as a trained scientist, I well know, you know, based on my training, science doesn't prove anything. You can still be evidence-based. That's not all the answers. We're emotional humans. We're social humans. Like, science isn't the end all be all either. And I feel like science is being weaponized now. So if there's anything that brands can do in the, you know, like, let's take action, I think it's not so much like, let's educate our consumers, because the reality is, at least in the places I've been and seen over many years of doing this, sometimes what's being meant is we're going to go re-educate our consumers and get them to agree with us. And I think that's a falsehood. I don't think you can go in with that kind of mindset and strategic thinking of how we're going, you know, how we, a brand, is going to approach this. And so if there's anything that can be done, I feel like brands would be well served to understand, kind of have a point of view on the different topics that they relate to and are relevant to their brand, and, you know, share it in respectful ways. But I would advise against getting into the kind of like tit for tat kind of engagement formats, because I feel like I'm seeing more and more of that.
Anybody have anything to add?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And it's funny to me from, you know, a farmer's perspective, how when these food companies think they're educating consumers, they're really kind of not. From the farmer's perspective, you know, I came from thousands of GMO acres, right? Like, we were growing GMOs, we were conventional, we had feedlots, we would use antibiotics and hormones sometimes, right? But when you understand the science behind what we were doing and how farmers today do so much less, grow more with less. We're using no more insecticides, safer herbicides. We're looking at all these amazing strides that farmers are doing to help the planet. Yet you have food marketers sitting here going, well, you have to go organic and non-GMO. And it's like, as farmers, we're sitting here going, no, like I'm down here in Florida where it's hot year round. Organic farmers down here, especially when things don't die in the winter, organic oftentimes uses just as much pesticides, if not more, in organics than they do not. Now, coming from a GMO farm in Iowa, you know, like they talk about GMOs are herbicide tolerant. Well, so can non-GMO crops, so can organic crops. So when these food companies are educating consumers, like even as my work as an influencer, I go and I meet with food companies and I talk to the farmers and growers and highlight their harvests and their planting and help people learn where their food comes from. I'm meeting with people in the office that even though they work for the company, never talk to their farmers.
Do you think that could be, I mean, imagine that there's a label, like a brand around pro GMO or, you know, GMO positive. Do you think there could be a successful way to market that in the current environment with consumers?
100%, 100%. And I see it all the time. And even with like my followers and whatnot, like if you go back and read the comment sections on my posts about non-GMO, like everybody in the comment section is like, I will not buy anything that says non-GMO. And I'm wondering, like, why do so many food companies use it? Like more and more people, if you look at, I've been in this space full time for like 6 years. And when you look at non-GMO 6 years ago compared to what it is now, it is so much of the hype around it has died down.
Erin, what do you think? Because your followers are slightly different. Do you think that, what do you think your followers would think about?
Well, I think Michelle made a good point, just as far as like the confusion, I think is the issue. Like, because then, you know, and it is around the marketing. So, you know, you have a non-GMO label. And I think the whole purpose behind that was, hopefully the purpose was to educate consumers, but that's not what it's doing. It's just making them fear GMOs. And most of them don't even really understand what that even means. They're just, when you put a label on something that says this isn't in there, they assume, well, then that must be bad. So then, you know, like some of us that are coming in now and sort of like educating and saying, hey, like this is what it actually means. I think it's just, it makes it so confusing. It's like, well, why are they lying to it reduces the trust even more in the food industry, you know, because it's like, well, that's not actually really what it means. And then it's like, well, why are they doing that? Why are they putting that label on there then if that's not what it means? And so just kind of, I think it does create more confusion than it does help to educate consumers. And then you get into like, well, who should I trust? You know, like I don't know who to trust anymore. And so it is like, just, it is really confusing to them, especially, you know, some of the larger brands that will have, you know, product lines that are not organic and non-GMO, and then they'll have product lines that are organic and non-GMO. And it's like, you know, to a consumer, it's like, well, if they think that is somehow better, like, why wouldn't all of their stuff be that way? So I think it's just like and you have to kind of explain, well, a lot of it is marketing. And so then that kind of erodes the trust when they kind of understand that. It's like, oh, these are just marketing labels. Well, what the heck? Like I've been paying more for a marketing label. So I think to me, that's the issue. Like it's not helping the consumer trust the food industry. And if anything, it's confusing them more and making them potentially trust it even less. So
I think there's a challenge though here, because I think to lump in the non-GMO symbol with organic and say, oh, it's all marketing isn't giving credit to organic. I mean, that is a regulated USDA term and label. And I think there are organic brands that even they are upset with the non-GMO symbol because they're like, look, we've gone above and beyond that. We want people to understand what our organic offering is.
Yeah, I guess the thing that I like, so I specifically like try to communicate like, yes, there are standards that it has to abide by. However, like a lot of people are purchasing it because they think they're getting something that's safer or more nutritious. So I guess like what it stands for to a lot of people isn't necessarily what it is.
Yeah. And at the same time, you know, you're right. There is standards behind organic. In organic, there is some solid research behind organic farming, but The good news, I guess, is that when that solid research comes forward, non-organic farmers can adopt those exact same practices. So non-organic farmers have access to all the tools in the toolbox, whereas organic is limited. And a lot of farmers go organic because there's a premium, because they make more money. Like, good for them. You cannot fault any farmer for choosing to become that way so that they can increase their bottom line on their farm. Good for them.
I still feel that tension of like, you have to be on one side or this or the other, period, and done. And I just really realize how much I feel that as a PhD consultant / somewhat influencer on LinkedIn. If I'm feeling that, I bet you a lot of people are feeling that. And I bet you that we have two edges of a debate where there's like vocal, advocates, proponents, influencers, whoever those people are. And then there's like a whole millions of bunches of us, both in the industry and everyday consumers, in the middle going each day, I don't know, like, just please. And I think this is maybe what you were getting at earlier, Michelle. At some point, if there's enough debate and enough confusion, either intentionally stirred up or inadvertently stirred up, like sort of like unknowingly stirred up, at some point, apathy sets in and people will just be like, you know what? I'm going to buy and eat whatever I like the taste of and fits my budget, and just like kind of tune everything out. And I think that that's not a win. Like, that's just a default mode of frustration. So to me, rather than like being pro-GMO or anti-GMO, pro-organic or anti-organic, pro this, anti that, like everything, the world is not as dichotomous as the influencer space would like you to believe. And the reason, in my opinion, that the influencer space becomes one of dichotomy, black and white thinking, is the way. I mean, feel free to disagree with me. You all have way more followers than I do, but like the dichotomy is what builds a following. If you have a platform that is clearly distinct and over here and different than what is over there, people are like, oh, okay, I can understand that. And it's distinct enough and it builds a following. If you're like, I see a lot of, the term micro influencer, whatever. I've even seen the term nano influencer. Like, if you're just like that little influencer out there, just like doing your small thing, saying your piece, and it's kind of mid gray area, flexitarian, practical type eater nutrition mode, I bet you don't have hundreds of thousands of followers. It's just too boring.
Yeah. I definitely agree. And I that's a lot of like so I'm not a dietitian. Like my page, I think a lot of times so many influencers are like telling you what to eat, what not to eat. And that's easy for people to understand. So then you have like my page where I'm like, this is what this means. This is what the studies show. And like so many people are just like, well, then should I buy it or shouldn't I? And I'm like, I'm not telling you like yes or no. I'm just giving you the info so that you can make a better decision. And maybe if you were afraid of something, you're not afraid of it anymore. Like, and I feel like that is tough because you do have just huge influencers that are just there's no nuance in what they're saying. It's like, but that's so easy for people to understand. And so people are like, I want to be told what I should eat and what I shouldn't eat. And so I think a lot of people specifically, will comment on my posts where I'm just like, hey, here's the info. And like, I'm not telling you my opinion. I'm not telling you what you should or shouldn't buy. Like, I'm not putting graphics up that have like a green check mark and then like an X, red X. There's so many influencers like that just get a ton of followers because it's easy for them to understand. Whether it's true or not is a different issue, but it's easy for them to look at these pictures and say like, okay, next time I go to the store, I'm not going to buy that anymore. I'm going to buy this. Like, this person says it's better. And so it is really hard to just give people info and say like, you're an adult, like you can make your own decision almost. And that's like what I'm trying to do, because I don't agree with like telling people, there's even some times where like I'll clear up something about like a food additive, and you'll get people saying like, oh, so you think we should just eat an all processed diet then? And it's like, no, I'm just giving you information. So like if you were afraid of, the specific ingredient, like you understand what it is now and you can make a better decision about it. So it is really hard because I think that black and white thinking, like when people are looking to accounts to follow, that's almost like what they're looking for because it's easy for them. And like when you're just giving them info and saying like, make your own decision, it's like, well, no, I want you to make this decision for me. So it is really hard, like not to fall into that too, because it gets you more followers. That's what people want to hear. I've even had some dietitians, like when I've cleared up misinformation about like food dyes or something like that, they're like, I can't believe you're giving people permission to eat these things. No, it was artificial sweeteners. Like I was just clearing up some misinformation about, there's so much misinformation about a lot of ingredients like that. And they were just like, I can't believe you're giving people permission to eat these. And I'm like, I'm just giving them information. Like if they want to choose, if they choose to eat them. So I think it's just really hard, like to get people like to not want to be told like, eat this, don't eat this. Like that's kind of what they're looking for a lot of times. And so I think influencers take advantage of that because that's what gets them followers too. So
Okay, so why don't we move to the topic of if you were the CEO or chief marketing officer of a company, what would you do? Or what advice would you give them on how to deal with this whole topic?
I think the biggest piece of advice I would have if I was counseling a CEO on the influencer space is to take the time directly and in that exact like person to go explore the space for yourself. Like make sure you kind of understand the nuances of what's being said and like don't just assign influencer marketing, social media management, whatever you want to fall that, term that under, thought leadership, whatever that is on a more CEO senior leadership level. Like don't just pass it off to let like the marketing team or the agency handle it. They can do that and will do that. And many are super skilled, but like really make sure you understand the content of the content. Like make sure you understand what's behind the debate and that you know what your company is or isn't out there saying in respect to that debate. Because the number of times I feel like the idea that like influencer is like, oh yeah, social media, like, oh yeah, no, we have a social media manager, it's handled, we're good. And like, that can be dangerous. Like make sure you know what's being tweeted on your company's behalf. Make sure you know kind of how you're being perceived. And it doesn't mean engage with everything you see, but it does mean make yourself aware in detail of what's going on and be proactive about a strategy. And the strategy may be, we're not going to be particularly loud in that space. Or the strategy may be, multi-pronged and very proactive. But to just kind of sort of dismiss it or pass it off, which I've seen, I think can be really dangerous to your reputation long-term. It may kind of bite you in the behind when you least expect it.
I actually kind of have a funny story. One of my really good friends works in marketing for, I'm not going to say the company or any specifics, but it was a company that I called out one of their ads because they weren't saying accurate information about farming. And so I posted it on my page and just like cleared up some of the misinformation. And I knew she worked for that company, but I didn't know she specifically worked on that ad campaign. And she called me and she was just like, hey, can you explain this to me? Like, I don't understand why it's incorrect. So, it was like kind of eye-opening for me. Like a lot of times, like they might not even understand that what they're saying is not necessarily accurate.
Yeah, I would absolutely echo and agree with what Rachel and Erin said. And, it's no secret that people want to feel connected to where their food comes from. We all love like a farmer's market and get to know where it comes from and learn how it's grown. So I think transparency is a really great way to go about it. Like in the livestock sector, if you're a contract grower for Purdue, that that's where your chicken goes. If you work for Hormel, you're produced for Hormel, like where your pork goes. The beef industry is different. as a commercial beef producer, I didn't know where my beef and lamb were going. And it's one of those things where it's like, I'd be really proud if I could say like my beef goes to Culver's or something like that. Whereas like, could corporations work closer with their farmers and help show the farmers behind it? And that transparency and that feel good messaging, I think would really go a long way.
Well, maybe that's another question. So if we say sometimes things get labeled like big, we have big food and big ag, and I wonder sometimes if big is really easy to target and criticize, but an individual farmer is usually, I think, kind of lovable and honest and trustworthy. And you have to be dedicated to be a farmer. The hours are terrible. You're out in awful weather and all the rest. But I even wonder like about food science, that I've heard people say, oh, well, we sell protein, but as soon as you put hydrolyzed in front of protein on the label, nobody wants to buy it. And I said, but why don't you have a mom or a marathoner and explain that there's an easy way to do protein and a hard way. And as soon as you put, hydrolyzed protein, is easier digested and so on. And just to explain that or have the information out there. But I think there's a fear to do that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of what I do on my page too, is like these things that we've just a lot of times been taught, avoid this ingredient. And there's like no more explanation other than that. Like, just, it is really hard though, because then even myself, I get called out as like an industry shill, or I'm trying to, and so it is tough because I think a lot of consumers might look at that and say, oh, they're just trying to explain to, like, they're trying to make us not feel like we shouldn't be eating these bad things, or you know what I mean? So it is really difficult because I get it, even though I'm not an industry shill. I'm I consult independently. I have no reason financially to be clearing up this misinformation or anything, but I think it is difficult because there is so much out there and that people have heard. And again, like, that's easy for them to understand, like, avoid this ingredient, it's bad. That's an easy thing for them to like start looking for on labels and avoiding it. And so when you try to explain, like, well, no, this is actually what it is, it's safe, it's regulated in foods at the amounts that it's in foods, it's safe. But a lot of times that's looked at as like, oh, well, you're just explaining away how like bad our food is, and you don't want us to know how bad it is.
Well, to your point too, Erin, like, a lot of times we as humans, we internalize the negativity so much. Like, you talk about the reasons you keep going is because you get this great feedback, and you do, like, the work you do is amazing. But we are so wired to get like 1 million people to tell you you're amazing and one person to tell you we suck. And then that one person like gets to you, and it's like, we can't do that. Like, you have to look as society overall and say, like, are people really like negative, or is it just that one or two people have gotten under our skin, and we're all going to get it, right? Whether you are or aren't paid by like big ag, it's like people are still going to think that regardless. And coming from like a larger scale farm, I would say, like, I would defend big ag because it's how we have our existence. Like, having a small farmer in your community is great, but I'm like, yeah, like, big ag is not bad. Like, I used to think it was, until I started touring like these large scale farms and learning and seeing the science and fascination behind our food is just incredibly beautiful. But people don't get to see that because, again, in my opinion, we really need more transparency. But it's like, big ag is how you wear clothes every day. Big ag is how you have sheets and towels and a beer every night when you get home from work. And big ag is why you can go to the grocery store and have whatever you want. Like, we don't sit there and rail against big cell phone when you have an Apple iPhone. You don't rail against big car when you drive a Chevy. It's like just the way that the world works. And why is food somehow bad? And in my opinion, it's because as an industry, we're not doing a good enough job showcasing big ag as being cool, because it is. We've got success, we've got technology, we've got so many amazing, beautiful things happening that people don't hear about. I think sometimes like big ag is too scared to step forward, but like, they need to knock it off and work with influencers like celebrities to tell that story, because there is a lot of great things to share.
I think also, I was just thinking when you were talking, Michelle, but also like just having the consumer like understand, you hear so much like just preservatives are bad. Like, that's just a blanket statement. And it's like, just the understanding of like, hey, preservatives are making our food, safer and like last longer. So I think just like the understanding of like, maybe even from a food scientist perspective, like I thought I got really good feedback when I interviewed that ice cream scientist. She, just explaining why these different ingredients are in something, to explain the functionality and like why, it could potentially make something at a lower price point for somebody that might not be able to afford something more expensive, or we can ship it farther, it can stay on the shelf longer, it reduces food waste, like all those things that people, when I explain it, it's like, oh well, that makes sense, like why was I so afraid of anything labeled as a preservative? So I think just like really, like not even really getting into like really detailed discussions of like specific things, just getting consumers, I mean, they've been hearing these just little like preservatives are bad, emulsifiers are bad, and like you ask them what an emulsifier is and like they have no idea, that they're just bad, like everyone's been telling me they're bad. So I think just like from more of like a science perspective of like, hey, this is what an emulsifier is, like this is the functionality it has in the food, this is what preservatives have reduced foodborne illness, like it's made our food supply safer. Just like really simple things for the consumer to maybe start questioning those little things they've been hearing a lot, and like just getting them to understand, like just saying like all preservatives are bad like doesn't make really any sense. So I think maybe there is like a way to do it where you're not really getting into like really detailed explanations of like specific ingredients, just getting consumers to understand like, yes, if you make it at home, you might not need this because it wouldn't be necessary, but this is why it's in a packaged food. Just to kind of start that understanding.
So I think maybe one of my insights from our talk today is where it might have cost, how many millions or tens of millions or hundreds of millions to have some kind of big national campaign 25 years ago. This is an opportunity because it's so cheap to get the message out, and there's lots of people who could do it. So maybe that's a message for the industry, because we're talking to them right now that there should be a lot more influencers or a lot more people just talking about it, even if we want to brand it all as or label it all as an influencer. Rachel, anything to add?
Yeah, actually, I think you're urging for more industry people to maybe think about maybe speaking up more, regardless of what side or sides of these debates they find themselves on. I will say, in my LinkedIn, I've got, I don't know, 15,000 connections now or something, most of which are industry people. Like it's more of a, professional network as opposed to like everyday consumer mode, although all industry people are consumers as well. But what I wanted to share is how interesting it is that for all the public comments you can see, because obviously the LinkedIn posts are out there, I get a lot of DMs, direct messages. And these DMs are often of the tone, I work for X or Y company. I wouldn't want to be publicly saying this, but I wanted you to know, blah, blah, blah. I wanted you to know, in my own experience, I found this, or I wanted you to know there's this research paper I read recently. I wanted you to know. And so they actually, my takeaway from that, because it's happened like it's a normal occurrence on most weeks. My takeaway from that is that the industry people do have opinions and do have thoughts. And I think that it behooves industry leadership, the CEO, the senior leadership team, whoever it is within a company of any size, to have those conversations internally about how, when, why would any of you as employees of this company want to share your thinking? Because I think there's a lot of fear when someone, it's not clear, like, are you out tweeting, posting, commenting, liking, following based on your own personal views, based on your company's personal views, or some mishmash of the two? And what's further interesting to me is that my sense, and this is total anecdotal mode, but absolutely, at least in my own personal experience, there are people that are working for companies that their personal views do diverge. They aren't the same. And so if you encourage your employees, staff, the people you work with, your colleagues in your business, if you as a leader encourage them to speak out more and share your thinking, and let's be out in the quote influencer space. Like, just remember, and I don't mean to instill further fear, but just remember, when you empower people to speak up and you empower them to be honest, they aren't always going to agree with you. And that's, if you want to, I think that's where the fear comes from, is that the social media influencer, digital engagement space, sphere, whatever we want to label all that, is it is uncontrolled in the sense that it's not like top-down advertising like the good old days. You don't just hyper control your message from start to finish and walk away. And so that idea that you're going to open yourself up to like real engagement and real dialogue, if that scares you as a leader, then I think, sit for a moment and question, why? What are we so scared of? What is it we are thinking we have to hide? Because in most cases, at least back in my, PR agency days, in many cases, if there was, a reticence to speak up, it was the silence could be interpreted as you do have something to hide.
I completely agree with that. And just overall, I guess my takeaway or closing thought is just, that we all need to do a better job of like working together, right? Like, you've got to have the farmers talking with the scientists, talking with the food corporations, and really keeping that dialogue open. You look at something like what happened with Burger King, and it's like, in hindsight, they're like, oh, we maybe should have done that differently. And so I commend them for like doing that. But overall, just remember to keep, my goal is to give science and farmers a bigger voice, and just remember to include them in that discussion. But just overall, just continue to bridge and not create more divisiveness in the food space.
Being more proactive, like Rachel was saying, not waiting for something to happen and then trying to explain it to consumers, and just being as transparent as you can be. I think also using the features on Instagram, doing a live Q&A, that helps out a lot too with transparency. Hey, we're going to have our scientist that works on this specific product. Do you want to ask them any questions? Just leaving an open Q&A sometimes. I've even done that too, on my pages, when people just have people asking the same questions over and over and over again. And I think it's nice to hear from somebody live, so it's not a canned response from corporate or something like that, and people are, it's hey, you can ask whatever questions you want and we'll answer them right here, so you know who you're talking to. And I think that just kind of increases the transparency.
Yeah, and when you have that conversation, you're really good at that, Erin. When you do that, it also boosts your algorithms too. So that's another thing for companies to recognize, is that when you are more involved in your social, your posts are going to be seen by more people. So you have that. And then also, just taking different approaches by using showcasing that human behind, the scientist behind your food, the farmer behind your food, that and doing it in a different way, not just a corporate America, robotic way, but using humor, using celebrities, doing something different and funny and innovative that can really help separate you.
Yeah, I think I have a couple of insights myself. I think, Rachel, when you said it's not about education or re-education anymore, it's definitely about a conversation. I think people in general are very forgiving. And I think if you do make a mistake, you can say, I'm really sorry. And I think that just boosts the trust. And I think, Erin, I was just thinking when you said, don't make it too corporate. In the past year, I was just thinking that when we got on the call tonight, I said, I love looking at where everybody lives and seeing their bookcases. I think everybody likes to see that. But if you think about it, work used to be the place where I'm going to say we lied the most. We wore suits, which was quite unnatural. We would always fix our hair. That's all gone. I think everybody just switches the camera on, kind of doesn't matter what you look like. So I think there's that extra layer of, we expect more transparency because we've had this whole year of total transparency with so many things. So I wonder if that also will carry over into how we expect companies to react with us, and how consumers want to also react with their brands and the companies that they're buying from, and so on. So I think I learned a ton tonight. So I hope that, well, we're speaking to the industry. We hope this is the first conversation that we have about this. I haven't seen anybody else talking about this or talking with real influencers. I feel like I know you guys already because I watch you all the time. But I hope this starts a conversation and that the industry feels more comfortable to think about this maybe in a different way going forward, and that you have some tips and some ideas. And we would love to hear lots and lots of feedback, so this can be a conversation that we can continue to make everybody understand more about really what's going to be the new normal. Gosh, we talked a long time, so thanks for everybody's participation and for being willing to get on and talk about this, and to everybody who's watching this. I hope everybody takes away something new. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.